hear me this time. That's great. So it sounds like you've been, so John, it sounds like you've been really busy
Yeah,
preparing this wood.
yeah.
Yeah, and tell me, is the yew wood, is that for the is that for this project?
So basically, all the wood I've got is for both the exhibitions, because I mean, the wood it has to be left for at least a year before you can actually prepare it and size it. Then you've got to watch it for a while. You've got to make sure there's no woodworm there, and all this sort of stuff. And so, I mean, you're thinking about 18 months in advance.
Yeah.
And some of the wood I've got, or the majority of the wood I've got, is from that photograph that you've seen, is from Bodnant. And it's from their windfalls from 2 years ago. And
Yeah, right.
types of pine and sequoia, silver birch, and crabapple. So
Okay.
the idea is, then I mean, I've already started working on some of them, which I've sent you the photographs, and then I'm going to sort of draw into them and just sort of find abstract memories. And when I get back in the end of March, I'm going to go for walks around Bodnant, and then come back and start to work onto those pieces of wood.
Okay, right, good.
So
Okay.
rather than sitting there, because if you sit there, I just become a slave to a kind of, sort of representational approach, because, I am originally very much a representational painter. So if I come away from the subject, I can think slightly differently.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. How do you mean when you say come away from the subject, what do you mean? Like just physically walking away? How do you mean?
Physically walking away and not sitting down and painting the subject.
Right.
Because in the past, up until about 5 years ago, 7 years ago, all I did was sit in front of the landscape, sit in front of trees, rocks, or whatever, and make images, both realistically and slightly abstractly sometimes. But I've broken away from that.
Cool.
I think about 2017.
I think it's really interesting, that thing about finding a little bit of distance between subject, subject and actual making. And it's something I was just thinking about, in the studio just yesterday, when I was working on some older works, and the distance that I've kind of traveled, by being away, than where I was when I was actually making those, which are acrylic ones on paper, which I was doing before the oil painting. So it's actually going back to last summer. It's quite a long time, and it's quite interesting, sort of working back onto older work. I don't know if you do this, and there's a kind of distance between where I am now with regard to color than where I was when I was working, and that distance, I think, is really interesting. Do you find that when you're working, when you leave some work now, for example, in Llandudno, and you're going to come back, I mean, do you find that there's a distance, that you've moved on a bit from where you were then, or?
Yes, I mean, I'm going to travel when I'm traveling to Crete. I've got a painting which I didn't quite finish. So what I'll do is I'll photograph it as soon as I get there, before I do any work on it, and when I'm finished.
And do you think, I mean, when you come back, or when you get to Crete, or when you come back, or whatever, wherever you're working, do you find that it's kind of, do you have to kind of re-engage with the work in a sort of way, can you just pick up?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. I can't answer that.
Yeah, I know. I think it's the same with me, but I did feel with these ones, I mean, I'm just talking about it because it's just current as to what I'm doing, is that I did feel somehow, with regard to sensory, appreciation of light and color that I'd kind of moved tremendously on from the works that I was doing. I mean, they would be back to last summer now. And I think it's sort of significant. So I think as I start the new ones for the project, which I'm just kicking off now, then they're going to be quite different. But it's really an observation. But I do think actually that distance thing, like what you were saying when you walk away from the subject, is really quite interesting. I don't think one's going to be able to analyze it, but it's just that feature of distance from subject, albeit just color or subject, or I mean, in your case, there's perhaps a closer objective view. I don't know, maybe not. And I think that distance thing is quite interesting.
Mm.
Yeah.
It's like, especially with the wood, as I was saying, it's like the piece of wood that I've got, because I can locate the wood in Crete that I'm working on, and I can locate the wood here that I'm working on. The wood, to a certain extent, is telling me a story. It's telling me what to do.
Of course, yeah, exactly.
And distance very quickly. Then, sorry, I was talking to my friend Peter Archer, who taught me at Camberwell years ago, and still in regular contact with him. And he was saying that in his painting, he sort of used to work truly to nature. Then he stopped, and when he actually stopped working from nature, and just literally worked in studio painting, it released something. It enabled him to actually go that much further. And he was saying that he was painting things that he had seen from 20 years ago. And I found that fascinating.
I think it is, yeah. It's it's really interesting. I mean, in some ways, do you think that's something to do with memory and how memory comes into it? I'm not sure, maybe. Yeah.
One thing I think is, and I was talking to Anders the other day, and one thing he kept on saying when he was looking at the work, he said, and he said this before when he wrote something about the work, was about timelessness.
Yeah, I mean, how does that work?
That's quite an interesting subject. I think that's quite an interesting topic, which we could obviously spend a lot more time talking about.